Before we dive into tonight's case, I need to ask you something. If you're the kind of person who can't look away from the darkness, who needs to understand how evil can hide behind a badge, then I'm speaking directly to you. I upload a new deep dive investigation every single day, cases that law enforcement buried, stories that make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. Right now, I'm challenging myself and this community to hit 1,000 subscribers before the new year. That's our goal. 1,000 people who refuse to let these stories die in forgotten file cabinets. If you're one of those people, hit subscribe right now. Because what I'm about to tell you, this isn't something you'll hear anywhere else. This is the story of Detective Tom Brennan, 7 missing women, and a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of a Florida Sheriff's Department. Time is running out for justice in some of Florida's most infamous cold cases, but the deeper we dig, the more disturbing the pattern becomes, an unsettling connection to those meant to protect and serve. The truth, however uncomfortable, is about to be revealed. Detective Tom Brennan had been with the Citrus County Sheriff's Office for 20 years, when everything he believed about his profession came crashing down. At 42, he was divorced, saw his 2 kids on weekends, and lived alone in a modest ranch house near Crystal River. His life revolved around work, cold cups of coffee, and the satisfaction that came from solving cases other detectives had given up on. He had earned a reputation as the guy who could find answers in files that had gone cold years ago, the detective who never stopped digging. It was a Wednesday evening in October 2019 when his phone rang just after 7. The sun had already set, and Tom was finishing up paperwork at his desk when Captain William Shepard called him into his office. Shepard was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with silver hair and a face weathered by decades in Florida sun. He had always been friendly with Tom, supportive. Even Captain Shepard gestured to a stack of file boxes in the corner of his office and told Tom he had something for him. A cold case initiative. The department wanted them to review unsolved missing persons from the 90s, see if new technology could shake anything loose, DNA databases, digital analysis, that sort of thing. Shepard said Tom was his best for this kind of work. Tom nodded, already mentally preparing for long nights ahead. Cold cases were his specialty, but they were also heartbreaking. Every file represented someone's daughter, sister, mother. Someone who vanished and never came home. When Tom asked how many they were talking about, Shepard told him 7 cases, all women, all from between 1992 and 1998. Rural areas mostly, Citrus and Levy counties. He wanted Tom to go through everything with fresh eyes. Tom loaded the boxes into his car that night and drove home through the darkness, Spanish moss hanging from oak trees like tattered curtains along the empty roads. When he got home, he made a pot of coffee and opened the first file. The women were all young, between 19 and 24 years old college students, waitresses, young professionals just starting their lives. Each one had vanished without a trace, last seen leaving work late at night or traveling alone on rural highways. Their cars had been found abandoned on remote roads, purses and keys left inside, no signs of struggle, no witnesses who saw anything useful. The first victim was Jennifer Walsh, a 19-year-old nursing student who disappeared in August 1992. She had been driving home from her shift at a diner in Inverness when her car was found on State Road 44, driver's door open, engine still running, her waitress apron folded neatly on the passenger seat. The second was Michelle Tanner, 22, vanished in March 1994 while driving home from visiting her grandmother in Dunellen. Her Honda Civic was discovered on a logging road off Highway 40, keys in the ignition, her cell phone on the dash, showing one missed call from her mother. Tom worked through the night, spreading crime scene photographs across his dining room table, reading witness statements and police reports until his eyes burned. By dawn, he had reviewed all 7 cases. The official conclusions varied: runaways, possible accidents, theories about a serial predator working the highways. But the cases had never been connected as a series. Different deputies had handled them, different jurisdictions, different years. They had been treated as isolated incidents. But Tom saw something else. He saw a pattern. All 7 women had vanished from rural areas late at night or early morning, All their vehicles had been found in isolated locations with no witnesses nearby, and in each case there was virtually no physical evidence. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that suggested violence or struggle. It was as if they had simply stepped out of their cars and disappeared into the Florida night. Tom stood and stretched, his back aching from hours hunched over the table. He walked to his kitchen window and watched the sun rise over the palmetto scrub behind his house. Something about these cases felt wrong, too clean, too careful. Whoever had taken these women knew what they were doing. He returned to the table and began examining the crime scene photographs more carefully. That's when he noticed it. In the background of a photo from the Jennifer Walsh case, taken of her abandoned car from a distance, there was a vehicle parked about 50 yards down the road, a tan Ford pickup truck. Tom squinted at the image, then pulled out the photos from the Michelle Tanner case there. In one of the wider shots of the logging road, barely visible through the trees, was what looked like the same tan pickup. Tom's heart began to beat faster. He went through the other cases, examining every photograph with a magnifying glass he kept for reviewing documents. In the Amanda Dockery case from 1994, there it was again. The same truck, or one very similar, partially visible in the tree line behind where her car had been found. He grabbed his laptop and enlarged the images digitally. In one of the photos, he could just make out part of a license plate. The resolution was terrible, grainy and unfocused, but he could see what looked like official government plates. His hands trembled slightly as he ran the partial plate through the system. The registration came back to Citrus County Sheriff's Office Fleet, issued between 1991 and 1999. Tom sat back in his chair, his coffee forgotten and cold. A department vehicle. That didn't necessarily mean anything sinister. Deputies often responded to abandoned vehicle calls, secured crime scenes, conducted searches in remote areas. It could be completely innocent, but 3 different cases, years apart, same truck in the background. That was more than coincidence. He needed to see the vehicle assignment logs from that era. Those records would be in the archives, stored in the basement of the department building. Tom showered, changed clothes, and drove to work, arriving just after 8 in the morning. He hadn't slept, but adrenaline was keeping him sharp. The archives room was dusty and poorly lit. Rows of metal shelves packed with boxes of old files, evidence bags, and administrative records. The clerk, an older woman named Patricia, who had worked for the department for 30 years, barely looked up when Tom signed in and explained what he needed. She told him fleet assignment logs from the 90s would be in the back, that nobody looked at those anymore because everything was digital now. It took her 20 minutes to locate the right boxes. Tom carried them to a small table in the corner and began going through the handwritten logs. Each deputy had been assigned specific vehicles with detailed records of mileage, maintenance, and assignments. He found the tan Ford pickup in the 1991 logs, vehicle number 347, and there, in neat handwriting, was the name of the deputy it had been assigned to, Leonard Graves. Tom had heard that name before, though Graves had retired long before Tom joined the force. He pulled out his phone and ran a quick search through the department database. Leonard Graves had joined the Citrus County Sheriff's Office in 1984, worked his way up from patrol deputy to investigator, exemplary service record, no complaints. Well respected in the community, he had retired in 1999 at the age of 48 and moved out of state. No forwarding address in the system. Tom checked the date of Graves's retirement, June 15th, 1999. The last disappearance in the series had been in late May 1999, a young woman named Kelly Patterson who had vanished while driving home from her job at a bookstore in Crystal River, 3 weeks between the last victim and Graves' sudden retirement. Tom felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. He didn't want to believe what his instincts were telling him. Graves had been a cop, a fellow officer, someone who had sworn the same oath Tom had. But the evidence was there, quiet and damning. He spent the rest of the day going through Graves' old case reports, requisitioning them from records without explaining why. Tom took the files home that evening, not yet ready to share his suspicions with anyone else. He needed to be sure. Late into the night, Tom read through every report Graves had filed during the 1990s. Traffic stops, domestic disturbances, theft reports, noise complaints. Nothing unusual on the surface. But then Tom noticed something in the missing persons reports themselves. Graves had been the first responder to 4 of the 7 cases. He had discovered the abandoned vehicles, filed the initial reports, conducted the preliminary investigations. In the other 3 cases, Graves had been part of the search teams, combing through woods and swampland, looking for the missing women. Tom pulled out the original incident reports and read them carefully. In 2 cases, Graves had reported that he had been on routine patrol when he discovered the abandoned vehicles, but when Tom cross-referenced the witness statements, he found something troubling. In both instances, civilians had called 911 to report the vehicles first. Graves couldn't have just stumbled upon them during patrol. He had responded to the calls. Why had he lied in his reports? Why claim he had found them when witnesses had already called them in? Tom's phone buzzed, a text from his daughter, asking if he was still coming to her soccer game on Saturday. He replied that he wouldn't miss it, trying to push away the growing dread that was settling over him. He needed to talk to the families, to find out if there were details that hadn't made it into the official reports. The next morning, Tom began making calls. He tracked down family members of the victims, explaining that he was conducting a review of their loved ones' cases. Most were grateful, desperate for any news after so many years of silence. Helen Dockery, the mother of Amanda Dockery, who had disappeared in 1994, agreed to meet Tom at her home in Homosassa. She was in her 70s now, a small woman with tired eyes who offered Tom sweet tea and homemade cookies. When he arrived on Friday afternoon, Helen told Tom she never stopped looking for her daughter. Photographs of Amanda covered the walls, frozen at 21, forever young. The police had said she probably ran away, met some boy, started a new life somewhere. But Helen knew Amanda wouldn't do that. She called her mother every day, every single day. Tom asked Helen to tell him about the last time she heard from Amanda. Helen's eyes filled with tears as she explained it was a Friday night, late November. Amanda worked at an Italian restaurant in Inverness called Antonio's. She got off work around 11:30 and called her mother from her car, like always, said she was heading home, would see her the next morning for breakfast. They had plans to go shopping. Tom asked if that was the last time she spoke to her, and Helen's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "No," she said. Amanda called again, maybe 15 minutes later, said a police officer had pulled her over for a broken tail light. Helen told her to be polite, do what the officer said. Amanda laughed and said it was fine, just a cop, that she'd be home soon. That was the last thing she ever said to her mother. Tom felt his chest tighten and asked if Amanda had mentioned the officer's name. Helen said no, they only talked for a minute. Amanda said she had to go. The officer was walking up to her window. Tom asked if she had told the investigating officers about this phone call, and Helen said of course she told that detective, the one who came to the house the next day. He took notes, said they'd look into it. Tom knew without asking who that detective had been. He checked his notes. Leonard Graves had been the lead investigator on Amanda Dockery's disappearance. Tom asked if they ever mentioned finding any record of a traffic stop that night, and Helen shook her head. They said there was no record. They said maybe Amanda was confused, maybe it wasn't a real officer, but Helen knew what her daughter said. She said it was a cop. Tom thanked Helen and left, his mind racing. Amanda had called her mother, said she was being pulled over by a police officer, and then vanished. Graves had been the lead investigator and had never mentioned the phone call in his reports. The detail about the broken taillight wasn't anywhere in the official file. He had one more person he needed to talk to. Earl Sutton, a retired fisherman who had been interviewed in connection with the 1996 disappearance of Nicole Barnes Earl's name, had appeared in the case file as a potential witness, but his statement had been brief and seemingly unimportant. Tom found Earl at a small house near the Withlacoochee River, sitting on his porch with a beer and a fishing magazine. He was in his 70s, lean and weathered, with kind eyes that narrowed when Tom introduced himself. Earl said he remembered that night. Been a long time, but you don't forget something like that. Pretty girl going missing, search parties, helicopters, whole county was looking for her. Tom asked Earl to tell him what he saw, and Earl took a long drink of his beer before answering. He said he was on the river, maybe 2 a.m. He liked fishing at night, always had. Peaceful. He saw headlights up on the logging road, truck parked next to a car. Figured someone broke down, getting help. He didn't think much of it at the time. Tom asked if he told the police about it, and Earl said yes. Next day, when he heard about the missing girl, figured it might be relevant. Deputy came and took his statement, asked him a few questions, and that was it. Never heard anything else about it. Tom pulled out his phone and showed Earl a photo lineup he had prepared. 6 photographs of men roughly the same age and build, all in civilian clothes. One of them was Leonard Graves. Tom asked if Earl recognized any of these men. Earl studied the photos carefully, then pointed to Graves without hesitation. "That's him," Earl said. "That's the deputy who took my statement." He remembered because Graves seemed real interested when he described the truck he saw. Asked him a lot of questions about it. Tom asked if Earl remembered what kind of truck it was, and Earl said it was a tan Ford pickup. He remembered because he used to have one just like it. Deputy truck, he thought, had those government plates. Tom felt his pulse quickening and asked Earl if he was saying the truck he saw that night was a sheriff's department vehicle. Earl said sure looked like it to him. That's why he didn't think nothing of it at the time. Figured it was just a deputy checking on an abandoned car. Tom thanked Earl and left, his mind churning. Graves had taken Earl's statement, had known about the truck, and had buried that information. The report in the file made no mention of a department vehicle being at the scene. He needed to see the property. According to public records, Graves had owned 40 acres of isolated land in Levy County, purchased in 1985 and sold in 2000, a year after his retirement. Tom looked up the address, a remote parcel accessible only by unmarked dirt roads, deep in pine forest, with no neighbors for miles. Saturday morning, Tom told his kids he had to work and would miss the soccer game. The guilt gnawed at him, but he couldn't wait. He drove north on Highway 19, then turned onto increasingly rural roads until he found the entrance to what had been Graves' property. A rusted gate blocked the path, chained and padlocked, with no trespassing signs nailed to the posts. Tom parked his truck and walked around the gate, following an overgrown path into the woods. The October air was thick and humid, filled with the drone of insects and the distant call of crows. Palmettos and sawgrass crowded the narrow trail, and Tom had to push through in places where the vegetation had reclaimed the path entirely. After about a quarter mile, he found what remained of a structure. Just a concrete foundation, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet, with metal bolt holes suggesting heavy equipment had once been anchored there. An industrial sink drain protruded from the concrete, and rusted pipes indicated where propane tanks had been connected. Whatever building had stood here had been deliberately demolished. The debris hauled away, Tom photographed everything, documenting the site methodically. Then he saw it, partially hidden by palmetto fronds and fallen pine needles, a concrete structure set into the ground, a storm cellar entrance, the kind common in this part of Florida, built to provide shelter from hurricanes and tornadoes. The metal door was rusted, secured with a heavy padlock that looked like it had been there for years. Tom walked back to his truck and retrieved bolt cutters from his emergency kit. His hands were shaking as he cut through the rusted shackle. The door opened with a screech of corroded metal. Stone steps led down into darkness. Tom pulled out his flashlight and descended carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. The air below was cold and damp, smelling of earth and something else, something organic and long decayed. The cellar was a concrete room approximately 12 feet by 15 feet, with a drainage system cut into the floor. Tom's flashlight beam swept across the walls and his breath caught in his throat. Deep scratches marked the concrete, gouges that could only have been made by fingernails. Rust-colored stains covered the floor near the drain, dried and faded but unmistakable. In the corner, partially buried in the dirt that had accumulated over the years, something glinted in his flashlight beam. Tom knelt and brushed away the soil. It was a silver bracelet tarnished black with age. He carefully extracted it and examined the engraving on the inner surface. The initials were still visible, A.D. Amanda Dockery. Tom had seen the bracelet in the photographs Helen had provided, visible in several pictures of Amanda from the months before her disappearance. He carefully placed the bracelet in an evidence bag, his hands trembling. He had found her, or at least he had found where she had been. He climbed out of the cellar and stood in the sunlight, breathing hard, 7 women. This is where they had been brought. This is where they had died. And the man who had done it had been a deputy sheriff, someone the community trusted, someone who wore a badge. Tom drove back to his house, barely remembering the journey. He sat in his car in the driveway for a long time, trying to process what he had discovered. Then he went inside, locked the doors, and began documenting everything. He wrote a detailed report of his investigation, compiled copies of all the evidence, and prepared to bring it to Captain Shepherd first thing Monday morning. But Monday never worked out the way he planned. Tom arrived at the office just after 8, the evidence bag containing Amanda's bracelet in his pocket, his written report in his briefcase. But before he could even request a meeting with Shepherd, the captain called him in. Shepherd's office door was closed, the blinds drawn. When Tom entered, the captain's expression was hard and cold in a way Tom had never seen before. Shepherd told Tom to sit down, and Tom obeyed, his instincts screaming that something was very wrong. Shepherd asked Tom if he wanted to tell him what he was doing on private property in Levy County. Over the weekend, Tom felt his stomach drop. He told the captain he was following up on a lead related to the cold cases he had been assigned. Shepherd's voice was sharp when he responded, the cases he assigned Tom to review, not to conduct unauthorized investigations on. He said he got a call that morning. Seems someone spotted Tom trespassing on land owned by a timber company, breaking and entering. That's a crime. Tom tried to explain that he found evidence, that he found a bracelet belonging to one of the victims, and he found a cellar on property that used to belong to Deputy Leonard Graves. Shepherd's face darkened. He told Tom to listen very carefully. The Graves cases were reviewed and closed years ago. There was a state investigation. It went nowhere because there was nothing there. Leonard Graves was a good cop who served this community with honor for 15 years. Tom tried to argue that the evidence suggested otherwise, but Shepherd cut him off, his voice rising. The evidence suggests nothing, he said. Tom was chasing ghosts, and in the process he was jeopardizing his career, his pension, and this department's reputation. Shepherd ordered Tom to drop any investigation related to Leonard Graves immediately. Return to his assigned duties. He asked if he made himself clear. Tom tried one more time, saying there are 7 families who deserve answers. Shepherd stood up, leaning over his desk. He asked Tom if he had 2 kids' child support payments, college funds to think about. Asked if Tom really wanted to throw all that away, if he really wanted to risk everything on some wild theory. The threat was barely veiled. Tom stood, his jaw clenched, and asked if that was all. Shepherd told him he was on desk duty effective immediately, pending a performance review. Then he told Tom to get out of his office. Tom left, his mind reeling. Shepherd knew. He had known about the investigation, known Tom had been to the property. Someone was watching him. That evening, Tom sat alone in his house trying to understand what was happening. He pulled up Shepherd's personnel file on his laptop. The captain had joined the force in 1986, just 2 years after Graves. Tom went through old duty rosters, scheduling records, anything he could access without raising red flags. The connection was there. Shepherd and Graves had worked together frequently, especially on night shifts during the early to mid-90s. When Graves retired in 1999, Shepherd had been promoted to sergeant within 3 weeks. Tom dug deeper, identifying 3 other deputies from that era who had worked closely with Graves. 2 were now lieutenants in the department. The 3rd was chief of police in the neighbouring county. Tom watched from his car one afternoon as these 4 men met for lunch at a restaurant outside of town, far from where they might normally be seen together. They sat at a corner booth, their conversation intense and private. He began making copies of everything, storing files at his friend's house, a contractor who lived in a different county. He didn't trust his own home anymore, didn't trust that anything he kept there would be safe. On Thursday night, Tom was working late at his dining room table, organizing evidence, preparing to contact the state attorney's office directly. It was just after midnight when he heard a crash from the back of his house. His back door had been kicked in. 2 men in dark clothing and ski masks burst through, moving fast. Tom grabbed his service weapon from the holster on his chair and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The men retreated immediately, running back out the way they had come. Tom heard a vehicle speed away. He called 911, his heart hammering. The response time was unusually slow, over 20 minutes. When 2 deputies finally arrived, they were men Tom didn't know well, and their interest in the break-in seemed minimal. One of them said it was probably drug addicts, looking around without much interest. This neighborhood, you get people looking for easy targets, should get better locks. After they left, Tom checked what was missing. His work laptop was gone, along with the copies of files he had made. But the most chilling discovery was what had been left behind. On his kitchen counter, someone had placed a photocopy of his kid's school schedule, complete with addresses, times, and the names of their teachers. The message was clear. Back off, or your children pay the price. Tom barely slept that night. He sat in his living room with his gun on his lap, watching the windows jumping at every sound. By morning, he had made his decision. He couldn't go through official channels. The department was compromised. The system had failed these women 25 years ago, and it was failing them again now. His children were in danger. He needed help from outside the department, someone with resources, someone who couldn't be intimidated. Tom reached out to Rebecca Torres, an investigative journalist with the Tampa Tribune, who had made her name exposing corruption in law enforcement. He had read her work, knew she was thorough and fearless. They agreed to meet at a busy restaurant in Tampa, public and crowded enough that no one could threaten them without witnesses. Torres was in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and skeptical. She listened as Tom laid out everything, the evidence from the cellar, the connections between Graves and current department officials, the cover-up, the threats against his family. Torres said it was a hell of a story if it was true, and told Tom he understood she needed to verify all of this independently. Tom said he understood. He just needed someone who couldn't be silenced. Torres had a source in the state police, someone she trusted. Over the next 2 weeks, she pulled records Tom couldn't access, and what she found confirmed his worst fears. The state police had received an anonymous tip in 1999 about Leonard Graves. Shortly before his retirement, they had launched a quiet investigation, surveillance, interviews, examining his financial records and movements. The investigation had found enough circumstantial evidence to warrant further scrutiny, but before they could move forward, the investigation was shut down by the state attorney's office. All records were sealed. The case was closed. Torres managed to speak, off the record, with one of the retired state investigators who had worked the case. He was bitter about what had happened. He told Torres they had Graves. Not enough for a conviction maybe, but enough to keep digging. But word came down from above. Multiple current and former law enforcement officials would have been implicated, people with connections, people with power. So they made a deal. Graves would retire, leave the state, never come back to Florida. In exchange, everything would be buried. The families would never know. The cases would stay cold. Torres recorded the conversation. She and Tom now had enough to go public, but Torres wanted more. She wanted Graves himself. It took her another week to track him down. Leonard Graves was living in a small town in rural Tennessee, near the Kentucky border. He was 73 now, living alone in a modest ranch house at the end of a gravel road. He worked part-time at a local hardware store. Torres called Tom and told him she found Graves and said they should go together. They drove to Tennessee on a Saturday morning, a long, quiet drive through the Appalachian foothills. The address led them to a property surrounded by woods, a well-maintained yard with a satellite dish and an old pickup truck in the driveway. Tom felt his pulse racing as they approached the front door. Torres had a recording device hidden in her purse. Tom knocked. The man who answered was elderly but still solid, with white hair and pale blue eyes that widened when he saw Tom's face. Tom asked if he was Leonard Graves. The man asked who was asking. Tom identified himself as Detective Tom Brennan from Citrus County Sheriff's Office, introduced Rebecca Torres from the Tampa Tribune, and said they'd like to ask some questions. Graves tried to close the door, but Tom put his foot in the gap. Tom told him they could do this here, or they could do it in Florida with a camera crew and the FBI his choice. Graves' shoulders sagged. He looked suddenly old and tired. He asked what they wanted. Tom said they wanted the truth. He pulled out a photograph of Amanda Dockery and began listing the names Amanda Dockery, Jennifer Walsh, Michelle Tanner, Nicole Barnes, Kelly Patterson, Christine Morgan, Lisa Hendricks, 7 women. He told Graves he knew what he did. Graves's hands began to shake. His face went pale. He said he didn't have to talk to them. Tom pulled out the evidence bag containing Amanda's bracelet and told Graves he found this in the cellar on his old property. They had witness statements. They had records showing his truck at the crime scenes. They had the phone call Amanda made to her mother, telling her a police officer pulled her over. They had everything. Graves stared at the bracelet, and tears began streaming down his weathered face. He whispered that he was sick back then. He got help. He'd been clean for 25 years. Tom demanded to know where they were, where he buried them. Graves looked up, his eyes hollow. He said, "They're at peace now. Let them rest. Let him die in peace." Tom's voice was hard when he responded. He told Graves he didn't get peace. Those families had lived without peace for 25 years. Graves was going to tell them where those women were, but Graves just shook his head and stepped back, closing the door. Tom heard the lock turn. Torres had recorded everything. The story ran as a front-page series in the Tampa Tribune 2 days later. Torres had been thorough, documenting everything, including audio clips of Graves' partial confession. The public reaction was immediate and furious. Protests erupted outside the Citrus County Sheriff's Office. Families of the victims demanded answers. News crews from across the state descended on the small community. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement opened a formal investigation. Within days, the FBI joined, citing possible civil rights violations. Captain William Shepard and 2 lieutenants were placed on administrative leave. They were eventually charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and violation of civil rights. Leonard Graves was extradited to Florida and charged with 7 counts of murder. He refused to cooperate with authorities, sitting silent through interrogations, staring at the walls of his cell. The FBI brought cadaver dogs to Graves' former property. They excavated the area around the demolished structure and the cellar. Over the course of 3 weeks, they found the remains of 6 women buried in shallow graves throughout the 40 acres. Dental records confirmed their identities. Amanda Dockery was among them. Helen Dockery stood at the edge of the excavation site when they found her daughter. Watching as investigators carefully removed the remains, Tom stood with her, holding her hand as she wept. After 25 years, she could finally bring Amanda home. Tom testified at the trials Captain Shepard and his accomplices tried to claim they had been following orders, that they were protecting the department's reputation, that they didn't know the full extent of Graves' crimes. The jury didn't believe them. They received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. Graves ultimately pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. In exchange for consecutive rather than concurrent sentences being dropped, he revealed the location of the 7th victim, Kelly Patterson. Her remains were found buried in the Ocala National Forest, miles from the other burial sites. Tom attended every hearing, every trial, standing with the families as they faced the man who had destroyed their lives. On the day Graves was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, Tom watched the elderly man shuffle out of the courtroom in chains. Graves looked at him once, their eyes meeting. Tom saw no remorse there, just emptiness. Tom left the Citrus County Sheriff's Office 3 months after the convictions. He couldn't continue working for a department that had protected a killer, that had valued loyalty to the badge over justice for victims. The new sheriff, elected in a landslide after the scandal, tried to convince him to stay, even offered him a promotion, but Tom declined. He took a position with the state attorney's office as a special investigator for cold cases. It paid less, but the work was clean. No politics, no covering for bad cops, just finding answers for families who had been waiting too long. The Citrus County Sheriff's Department underwent massive reforms. Independent oversight boards were established. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. The culture of protecting your own, no matter what, was supposed to be over. But Tom wondered how many other Leonard Graves were out there, hiding behind badges, protected by people who valued the thin blue line more than the truth. The families of the 7 victims received settlements from the county, though no amount of money could compensate for what they had lost. some filed additional civil suits. Helen Dockery never did. She told Tom that she just wanted to bury her daughter and try to find peace. Tom visited Amanda's grave on the anniversary of the day they found her. He brought flowers and stood in the quiet cemetery, thinking about that phone call 25 years ago, a young woman telling her mother not to worry, it's just a cop. She had trusted the badge. They all had. And that trust had been betrayed in the worst way imaginable. People sometimes ask Tom if he regrets pursuing the investigation, if he thinks it was worth risking everything he thinks about Amanda Dockery, calling her mother that night, telling her not to worry, it's just a cop. She trusted the badge. They all did. That trust was betrayed in the worst possible way. 7 young women with their whole lives ahead of them. 25 years of families not knowing, hoping, grieving without closure, and all of it could have been stopped if someone, anyone in that department had chosen to do the right thing in 1999. The badge is supposed to mean something. It's supposed to represent protection, justice, service. When those who wear it choose to protect each other instead of the innocent, they destroy everything it stands for. Amanda's bracelet sits on Tom's desk now, returned to him by Helen Dockery, who said she wanted him to keep it. A reminder of why he does this work. Not for the department, not for the politics, but for the victims who can't speak for themselves. For the families who deserve truth, no matter how painful. Sometimes the monsters aren't hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they're hiding in plain sight, protected by the very system meant to stop them, and sometimes the only way to bring them into the light is to risk everything. If this story moved you, if you believe these cases deserve to be told, remember we're on a mission here. 1,000 subscribers before the new year. That's the goal. 1,000 people who refuse to let these stories stay buried. Hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I've got another case that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. These stories need to be told, and I'll be here every single day digging through the files that others want to forget, because the truth, however uncomfortable, deserves to be revealed.